Hi everybody, welcome back to the Intercooler podcast with Dan Prosser and Andrew Frankel, episode 252. Lots of topics that we want to discuss this week, Andrew. Crashing, rallying,
yes.
EVs.
Yes, I can do quite a lot on 1 and 3. You may be doing a lot of the talking on 2.
I'll do some heavy lifting on topic 2. Yeah, crashing, rallying, EVs. That's 3 different topics.
Yeah.
So we're starting off with crashing because Karun Chandok has written an insightful piece for us on the subject of crashing.
Yes.
You wanted him to sort of delve into this a little bit because it's an amazing thing. These elite level racing drivers do seem to be able to have monster shunts sometimes, and then they'll leap out of the car.
Yes. And all they can think about is back in the day when they used to have spare cars. Do you remember Martin Brundle's shunt at Adelaide? Yeah. I think in '96, in the Peugeot engined, what was it? Is it a Jordan?
Pass.
Can't remember what it was. I mean, enormous. You can see it on YouTube, and it's fine because no one gets hurt. But it's just one of those oh my god crashes where the car goes over and over and bits. It looks like an aircraft has come down. Yeah. And out he goes, and literally the only thing he's interested in is getting in the spare car, because back then they had spare cars and you could do that. And they red flagged the race and you could restart from the back of the grid in your other car. And I look at that stuff and I just think these guys. It's why I asked Karun to write the piece, because I just want to try to understand how different these guys are to the rest of us. I want to understand what goes through the mind of a Formula One driver, any top level racing driver, when they realise this ain't coming back. Yeah, we're going off. What are they thinking? Are they thinking this is going to hurt? Are they scared? Are they just thinking, this is really annoying? I mean, I just wanted to know. And so that's what Karun wrote about. And I think what it is I don't think I'm giving any spoilers here to say that they think in a rather different way to the rest of us.
Goodness me. Don't they ever? Well, I mean, we know that they do because they keep doing it. Yeah. It doesn't put them off. Even Romain Grosjean's, I mean, absolutely the most frightening crash I've ever seen in motor racing.
Absolutely.
And he was gagging to get back in a racing car as far as I could tell, and he did. He got back in. I know that was at the end of his Formula One career, but not through any choice of his own. And he raced in IndyCar for several seasons full time. Yeah, and just apparently with his enthusiasm undiminished.
Completely undiminished. It is. I mean, Karun was saying that nobody gets to the top of that particular tree without having a great number of crashes. It's just an occupational hazard. You're going to go off. You are going to hit stuff. You're going to hit stuff hard. And I guess it becomes sort of self-selecting, doesn't it? Because if you are the sort of person who, frankly, like me, would be rather spooked by even one of those.
Also me.
Yeah. Then you're never going to make it. So I think by definition, there's a sort of Darwinian evolutionary thing going on here that only the total nutcases like Karun and people who are just interested in getting back in the car, they are the only ones who will ever make it by definition.
Yeah, there's a survivorship bias as well. We don't hear from the people who have that shunt in their early single-seater career.
No, it's
call
true.
It a day and go and do something else.
But it's very. I'm just trying to think of any Formula One driver who's had a really enormous shunt that has ended their career, not because they got badly hurt, but because they just thought, that's one too many. I just don't want to do this. I know that Richard Atwood retired at the end of 1971, which must have been just about the most dangerous era of racing. And he was racing in Formula One and he was racing in sports cars. And his teammate from that season, Pedro Rodriguez, had been killed in a terrible fiery accident at the Norris Ring in a Herbie Muller Ferrari 512. And he told me that he stopped because he wanted to live, and because he had a young family, and he felt that it just simply didn't add up for him. But he didn't stop because he'd had a big crash and got spooked. He just took a very calm, considered decision. I think the same was with Jackie Stewart at the end of '73. I mean, we remember he was going to do 100 Grand Prix, and having won his third world title, retire, and then at Watkins Glen just after his 99th Grand Prix, tragically his teammate Francois Servet got killed. So he never did, and the team withdrew from the race. So he never did that 100th race, and he retired. But that was because he had seen too many people die. But again, it wasn't because he had a particularly... I mean, he had an enormous accident at Spa in 1965. But that didn't stop him. But over a period of time, there was a cumulative effect, clearly, particularly at that time. Now, these days, you know, as we have seen, even with Romain Grosjean, you can have the most almighty accident and kind of be okay. So maybe there is something of them just thinking, well, you know, I can hit that wall at some enormous speed and, you know, have dozens and dozens of G applied upon my body, and I'm probably going to be okay. Yeah. So maybe that affects the thinking too. Yeah.
They're definitely wired differently to the rest of us, and I think you mentioned it, they accept that it's an occupational hazard. It's part of what they do. It's going to happen. And Corinne even writes about what goes through your mind in these moments. Yes. In that split second when you realise it's going to go.
Yeah.
Bloody hell. And this is, of course, my prompt to remind you all that if you want to read that story and you're not yet subscribed to the Intercooler, as a podcast listener, you can subscribe for 15% off using coupon code POD15 at checkout.
Yes.
And you really, really should.
And lots and lots and lots of you do.
Yeah.
Every week. Everybody, not everybody, that's not true. So many of you, and I know we say it every week, but we're going to continue to because we know that it works. And frankly, we want you guys subscribing to our website and our app because it's actually the vast bulk of what we do and what we are most proud of. And every week, a load more of you come over, so forgive us for banging on about it.
Yeah, and there'll be a link in the description in the show notes, or just head to the-intercooler.com and find the subscribe page.
Yeah.
So Corinne's written this brilliant story that goes up next week. But the point is, they're wired differently to the rest of us, and you wanted to talk about what goes on in your mind during these moments.
Yes.
I don't know if you're talking racing or on the road.
Well, do you know what? There is a difference.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
There is a difference, because if you have a crash on the road, almost by definition, it's completely unexpected. No one ever, goes out there taking a known risk that they may crash. Whereas every time you get in a racing car, there's a good chance that something's going to happen, because that's racing, and because so much of it is beyond your control. Most of all the other people you're on the track with, and if somebody decides to drop the contents of their engine on the track in front of you, you're going to have a crash. And I do think differently about it. I'm certainly no career, but okay. So I've never had a big crash while racing, probably because I'm not going fast enough. But there have been moments where I've not had big crashes in racing through sheer luck alone. So the one which I remember most clearly was in 2015, Silverstone 24 Hours. I was in a GT4 Aston Vantage, and through the Beckett's complex, which is chuffing fast in one of those, there was just oil down. And I just it was in the middle of the night. I was just minding my own business. I wasn't dicing with anyone. I was just, you know what it's like. You just knock out the laps. You're trying to keep to whatever the prescribed time is. And so you're going not quite as fast as you can, but certainly fast enough so that if anything completely unexpected happens, then there's nothing you can do about it. And I suddenly found myself going backwards off the track at least 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. Oof.
And I mean, your mind does strange things. It does slow down. And my first thought was, I don't understand. What did I do wrong? And this is while I'm still going backwards at 100 miles an hour. And then I am thinking about the trajectory, but I'm not really thinking about where I'm going to hit. I'm thinking about how far I'm going to go off, how long it's going to take me to get back on. And actually, it's only when you haven't hit anything and you get back on the track and you've got on the radio and you go, sorry, gone off, because you still didn't realise it wasn't your fault at the time. That's when it hits you. Then that's when you think, I won't use the word, but there's a particular word that comes into your head and you think, that could have been horrible. Because if I'd gone in rather than out or whatever and into that tyre wall over there, backwards at 100 miles an hour, that is going to really, really hurt. And it's going to end the race for everybody and all the people who've given up their time for you and your teammates and everything else. But at the time, when you're doing it, it's just really annoying.
It says a lot about human psychology, doesn't it? Something kicks in there.
Yeah.
Some sort of survivorship thing, maybe. I
Yes.
don't know. I have no idea. But the fact that it's not sheer panic immediately says a great deal.
Yeah. There's a bit of you, I think, in a circumstance like that, which thinks it's not going to happen to me. regardless of whether it does or it doesn't. I think there's a bit of you which just refuses to accept that A, you're completely out of control. And I don't think we had any on board at the time. But I bet if you went back and you looked at the on board, however incompetently, I bet you would have seen me steering the car, trying to somehow collect it. I mean, hopelessly, but nevertheless, I would have still been working right up to the moment the car stopped. Because what else are you going to do?
It reminds me actually of that.
The idea of just sort of putting my hands in it, like, which is what you should do.
Yeah.
You should take your hand, if you're completely out of control and it's gone, and particularly if you know you're going to hit a wall. Now, I didn't, because A, I was going backwards, and B, I didn't hit a wall. But if you know you're going to hit a wall, the first thing you should do is take your hands off the wheel, because that's how people break their wrists and their thumbs.
Rally drivers grab their belts.
Yes, exactly. But the idea of me, of literally giving up and just going, okay, I'm literally a passenger now. I could be in the other seat. It would make no difference. I just couldn't do it. I just don't think that in my head I would be psychologically able to give up the fight.
Yeah.
Even if I knew it was absolutely the thing I should be doing.
Yeah. It just reminds me, hearing you talk, of, I think it was Sebastian Buemi. There's this amazing footage of him in must be a Toro Rosso. Was it at Valencia? I think it was. That rings a bell. No, I might have that wrong. No, maybe it's Malaysia or somewhere like that. And he's heading into a braking zone for a hairpin, and his front wheels just leap off the car. They just pop off. It's really bizarre. I don't know what on earth caused it, but both wheels just go flying off. And he's got no front wheels on his car. And he's just instinctively trying to steer the thing. It's amazing.
What, on its brake discs?
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
No.
Bit of understeer.
Yeah. It is amazing how that sort of reptilian mind just kicks in and gets you to do stuff to try and get yourself out of trouble. So I've racing crashes. I've not really had a racing crash, but the observation I would make here is that I've observed lots.
Yeah. Right.
And one comes to mind in particular. First lap in Caterham's at Croft, and I'm middle of the pack, and we're going into the first tight right-hander, or maybe it's I think it's the first tight right-hander, and I'm close to the car in front of me, and all of a sudden, from the corner of my eye, I see this orange flash go straight down the outside of us, past my car, pile into a couple of the cars a little bit ahead of me, take them out. So 3 cars go spinning off the track. And your first instinct is, oh, good, I'm further up the pack
Exactly.
now.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. You would think that's 3 places I don't have to get. Yeah.
And
cracking.
And if you observed anything like that on the road, you would be absolutely terrified by it. You'd get this bolt of adrenaline. Your heart would just go bang.
That's the difference.
But in a race, none of that happens.
No, you're just thinking, that much closer to the podium.
It's
awful.
really...
It's terrible, really. It doesn't say an awful lot about us, does it?
No. It's really bizarre, though. Just those... You're observing the same thing, but because the circumstances are different, your instinctive reaction is totally different.
Have you ever been in a race where someone's gone off? I can remember a race I did at Spa, which was one of these Spa 6-hour races, which are mainly done in the dark. And someone had gone off in a Lotus Cortina, I think. And lap after lap, you're behind the safety car, and you go by, and the safety car is not going in. The car is still there. There are still people all over the car. And it kind of gets in your head a bit. And because you're not working anymore in the car, and because you've been sweating, you get very cold and you start to shiver a bit. And you've got nothing else. You can't turn on the radio. You can't listen to your latest playlist. All you can do is just drive around, and every time you go past it, and that is when I think it's one of my many vulnerabilities as a driver in competition. I just let that stuff get in my head, and I think, oh blimey, that could have been me. Yeah,
I do remember racing in the mini challenge at Donington, and I think it's maybe one of the first times they'd done this, but they gave all the drivers an earpiece so that the race control could speak to the drivers.
Oh, okay.
And that was a feisty championship. I'm sure it still is, particularly at the front of the pack.
Well, there are people trying to get noticed for BTCC and stuff like that. It's actually proper people, isn't it?
They take it deadly seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the guys up the front had gone off, or been punted off probably, and rolled the thing. And it was you could see him right there. The car had clearly been over. And race control's talking us through what's going on. And so you're well aware of what's happened. And as you say, it takes a while for them to clear the car up, and then away you go again. And I can't remember exactly what I was thinking at that time, but I'm sure I was pretty relieved when that race was finally over.
Yes.
And you just think, okay, I got away with that one.
Yeah, there's that moment, isn't there, when we mustn't spend the entire time talking about racing because we've done a podcast on that recently. But when the green flag goes and you spent all this time sort of pondering and thinking, and then you go from nothing to everything in an instant. You literally have to go from that to driving as fast as you possibly can, particularly when that green flag comes out, because it's basically like a restart, isn't it? Because you're all gathered together in one big clump.
Yeah.
And there are cars all over you, and you're trying to get past cars, and cars are trying to get past you. And having spent the last, sometimes it can be half an hour waiting for them to clear up somebody else's accident. And then suddenly from that, and then you're off, and it's just, it's just crazy, isn't it?
So, road crashes.
Road crashes, yeah, totally different.
Touch wood. I've not done a great deal of this. A little bit.
Small Bentley in a ditch, I seem to remember.
It wasn't a crash. That was an off.
Oh, okay. So what's the difference between an off and a crash?
Well, the car was barely damaged. Barely damaged.
Yeah, okay.
But I have had a pretty monster shunt in a BMW M135i in the middle of Wales. But it was the other guy's fault. There was a guy coming around a blind corner, essentially on my side of the road.
Yes.
And so I turned into this corner, maybe going a little bit quickly, and there he was.
Yeah.
And I had nowhere to go. I tried to squeeze between his car and the barrier, beyond which was a big drop. Didn't quite make the gap, and we hit almost corner to corner. It wrote the car off. And that it's a really, really odd moment. I've never had it before. All airbags went off. You see that puff of smoke from the pyrotechnics that send the airbag off, and your first thought is, car's on fire. And of course it's not, but it runs through your mind very, very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not very nice.
Again, a really stupid thing to say. I've never been bagged. Maybe that'll happen this afternoon. I hope not. But on terms, I mean, when I think of road accidents, I can think of two really significant ones that I've been involved in. One, absolutely not my fault. One, absolutely my fault. So the one that was completely my fault was in 1992, so 33 years ago, blimey. First Evo Lancia Integrale into the country. It was January. There was snow all over the place. So this car turned up and I couldn't help myself. I had to take it to the test track. Without even really beginning to think whether the test track would even be open in that weather. That's how dumb I was.
Yeah.
But all the motorways were open, so I drove up towards Millbrook, and then there was there still is, fun little route you used to take from junction 12 of the M1 to the track. And yeah, I thought I was Juha Kankkunen. And I can remember I'd had a big moment in it and got away with it. And I can remember thinking to myself, okay, calm down, Frankel. Okay, fine. You've had your moment, just calm. I didn't listen to myself. And there's a little bridge you will know, which you go over, which is slightly sort of kinked, and it's a very fast approach. And there was nothing else around because no one else was stupid to be out on the road in those times. And I didn't know that if water is flowing under a bridge when it's very cold, ice forms on top of it. Who knew? Not me. Anyway, so literally, my first memory, before I'd had time to react, it was I could see my tyre tracks, which I knew wasn't a good look, because that clearly meant I was going backwards. And then the car went down a ditch on one side. Because the car was left-hand drive and going backwards, it went off on the right, which means the B pillar hit my side of my head. And then it rotated down the ditch, spat itself back up onto the road. No damage to anything other than the car and myself. And that was that. And my entire sort of thought process about that accident is a bit skewed because I'd had this bang on the head. And although I was capable of functioning, I mean, I managed to get to a house and make a telephone call because we didn't have mobile phones then. It wasn't until I was in London and I'd gone to a hospital because I felt a bit odd, and they diagnosed mild concussion and, completely to my surprise, 3 broken ribs. Didn't even know I had them.
Wow.
And then for the next 6 months, I was in agony.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I had that accident in the BMW, the police turned up. Actually, one of the really horrible things was, because it was a modern car, it had that, the SOS system. So airbags go off, automatically calls a call centre somewhere. Yeah. I jumped out of the car and went down to see the other bloke, make sure he was okay. And when I got back to my car, I just heard a little voice going, hello, can anyone hear me? Are you there?
Ooh.
And I just thought, God, imagine being the person on the end of that line, not being able to hear anyone responding. You leap to all sorts of conclusions, wouldn't you? You have no idea what's gone on. You're just not hearing anyone talk back to you.
Yeah.
That was really, really gruesome, actually. And then the police came, and it's only sort of 20 minutes later that you start sort of shivering because of I guess it's the adrenaline. And then you realise that you're in a little bit of shock.
Yes.
Ugh, well, it's not fun.
No, but that is crashing. Crashing tends not to be fun.
Yeah, indeed.
There aren't many entertaining crashes, are there?
No one does it for fun, do they?
No, well, indeed.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a bit about rallying, didn't we? Specifically, Elfyn Evans, the Welsh WRC driver,
Yes.
Toyota driver, who is currently leading the World Championship, the 2025 Championship, after only 2 rounds. But he won last time out in Sweden, and that's his 10th career victory.
Yes.
Which is significant because that puts him on equal footing in terms of WRC wins, at least, with Richard Burns.
The reason we're talking about this, if I'm honest, is because I am not, as you know, as people listen to this podcast may know, I'm not someone who avidly follows rallying. Certainly not like you are. But I just saw this stat and suddenly realised that makes him as successful as Richard Burns. And Richard is quite rightly revered alongside Colin McRae as our 2 only WRC championships.
Yeah.
Even though, annoyingly, I can't find anywhere which will give you any odds on the outcome of this year's championship. I think if anybody were to give you odds, that Elfyn would probably be odds-on favourite to win it at the moment. As we said, he's won as many rounds as Burns. And I just thought that briefly we ought to just celebrate this.
Acknowledge that,
because I just don't think that many people have heard of Elfyn Evans.
Yeah, and that's right. Britain has got a world-class rally driver at the moment, in with a great shot of becoming world champion.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's the sort of thing that we should celebrate. He has won as many as Burns. We should point out that Elfyn has had a longer career. Burns' career, of course, sadly, got cut very, very short.
I think he was 32 when he did his last.
I think 32. He died when he was 34,
yes.
Which is just unbelievable.
And Elfyn is he's older than that now.
He's 36
now.
He's
36. Yeah.
Burns was still at the top of his game, and he was going back to Subaru and ProDrive, and perhaps he would have won a whole lot more. I don't know, but we'll never know. But Elfyn, he has now won 10 Worlds of the Championship, which is fantastic. He's leading the championship after 2 rounds. He's finished runner-up in the title race 4 times.
So he's absolutely up there as one of the great rally drivers of his era, isn't he? He obviously there's no proof yet, and there may never be, to suggest that he's a sort of a Loeb or an Ogier. But neither of them is doing full seasons.
No.
And so you can only be judged against the people you're up against.
Yeah.
And given the people he's up against, he would seem to be, one of, if not the best.
I think he's up there. I think he's got a great chance this year. Runner-up 4 times. There certainly 1 or 2 of those he perhaps should have won, or he came very, very close to winning.
Yes.
His probably the toughest opponent is going to be Kalle Rovanperä, who, as far as I know, is doing a full season this year.
In the same car.
In the same car. He only did half a season last year. He's already a 2-time world champion. I think he's something like 13 years old. He's very, very young. But then Elfyn, if he wins the championship, he's also got to beat the reigning champion, Thierry Neuville, former champion Ott Tanak. So it's a high-class field still. And so if Elfyn wins, no one's handed him a championship.
That's the thing. Is that not what you want?
Yeah.
Do you not want to win against
the best
proper opposition?
Well, this is why last year Thierry Neuville won the championship. And he is a fantastic driver, right? But is
he Terry Newtown?
I guess he is, yeah.
Sorry.
Terry Newtown. He was even more the bridesmaid than Elfyn was before he won the championship. He'd finished second 5 times, 4 times in succession, actually. And so he was always there or thereabouts, but never quite at the level of Ogier or Kalle Rovanperä.
Yes.
And so he won his championship last year when neither of those guys was doing a full season.
Yes.
And quite often, those guys would drop in, do a rally, win,
yes,
and then take a couple of months off.
Yes.
So there was this sense that Neuville won, but only because those guys...
Almost by default.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think a win's a win, and when history looks back at these things, history doesn't look too hard about the circumstances.
No.
The fact is, he's a world rally champion. And you don't do that by not being very good in a rally car.
Yep. But now, Evans, He's going up against 3 former or reigning world champions this year. All, I think, doing full campaigns. So, yeah, if he wins it, it's absolutely on merit.
Did I tell you I've been driven by him?
Have you?
Yes.
Go on then.
I went up to M Sport when he was driving for Ford.
Yep.
And so what's one rung down from a full World Rally car? Is it an R5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we went out an R5 Fiesta, but it's still 4-wheel drive and all the tricks.
300 horsepower.
300 horsepower.
Yep.
Okay. So we went out on this on some special stage they've got up in Cumbria.
Yep.
I wish I could tell you anything about it.
Greystoke. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell you anything about it because it was just sort of, oh, okay, that's happened. I've no idea what's happened, but something just happened. And I just sat in the passenger seat of this thing and just failed to understand for about 10 minutes. And
it's just unbelievable, isn't it? It is unbelievable.
I couldn't. I mean, I really do struggle through it, and it's not that I was in any way bored. It was just indecipherable.
Yeah.
It did not compute.
Yeah.
So yes. So there you go. That's my rallying claim to fame.
I suspect that was Greystoke, which is M Sport's test venue up in Cumbria. Yes. And I was there years and years and years ago with Elfyn Evans and a bunch of other people, but there was a shootout in little front-wheel drive Fiestas to spend a year working up at M Sport. And my mate had done it the year before, Adam Gould. Hello, Adam. And Elfyn was part of the bunch that was trying to win it that year. Adam won it last year, and so he spent the year up at M Sport. Elfyn was hoping to win it that year to get his year up at M Sport. And the idea was you'd work with the mechanics a lot, work with the engineers, do some shaking down of the WRC cars, that sort of thing. So it's a good opportunity. Yeah. And so all the best young rally drivers were in attendance that day. And you do other things like there's like a fitness shootout and I don't know, some other, maybe the psychological assessments or whatever. I can't remember. But this was in the middle of winter and Greystoke was just frozen. It was ice.
Yes.
And I just remember being stood up on a bank near a tight right-hander and car after car, all these young guys took their own Fiesta rally cars up there and it was timed and they were going as fast as they could. I just remember on one particularly icy corner just watching car after car go off into this ditch. And it was really bizarre, just so low speed, only a little bit faster than walking pace.
Yes.
But there's nothing they could do. If they went in too quick, nothing they could do. And then I remember being stood with a bunch of other people, including Marcus Gronom was there, 2-time World Rally Championship legend. And Elfyn goes past and he's back on the gas once he's through the really icy bit and he's nailed, he's, gear up. And then he goes out of view. And I was with Matthew Wilson as well, Malcolm Wilson's son, who was a great rally driver, a really good rally driver himself. He was there in the crowd. And it just went quiet. Elfyn's car went around the corner, behind the trees, and then it just went quiet. And it was Matt who shouted, "He's off," and just sprinted down. Just knew.
Couldn't hear it
from
anymore.
The engine sound. Just knew he was off and just sprinted around the corner. We all did. And there was Elfyn's car in a ditch upside down. And the lad, he must have been a teenager still then, I would have thought. And he got out, flushed, clearly really couldn't understand what had happened, really stunned that he'd gone off and the car was upside down. And I just remember the effort to drag his car out and get it on its wheels again. So it was...
What, he'd hit ice or something?
I don't know exactly what had happened. I think it was a quick bit of stage. I don't know if he just got the line wrong or something. But that was a really interesting moment to get to see all of that, because that really felt like peering behind the scenes.
Yes.
Journalists wouldn't often get to go and see that sort of thing. No. So to get to do that was really, really interesting. But the guy is a heck of a rally driver. What's interesting is that I don't think he was quite the class of or he wasn't outstanding in his field in the sort of his British junior days. He was one of the guys then. But he got his opportunities, and he just seemed to go up a level.
I remember Malcolm Wilson saying to me when I went up there, and I'm saying to him, just be honest with me. How good is he? Is he really another Colin? Is he another Richard? And Malcolm said to me, he's not now, but I can see how he could be. And and that seems to be what's happened.
It does.
You know, he would appear to be getting better, even though he's at 36. I think even for a rally driver, he's probably, you know, either at his prime or maybe even slightly past it. I don't know. It probably matters less these days as it does in Formula One, how old you are. But I mean, all the evidence is that he's still on the way up.
The last thing I want to say about Evans is, I remember that for the longest time, it used to be that particular rounds of the championship were for specialists. And if you weren't local, or a specialist of some sort, you just stood no chance.
Yeah, you were saying that unless you were a Scandinavian, you couldn't win a Scandinavia.
Yeah, exactly. Or unless you were Finnish, you wouldn't win the Finnish round of the championship. Yeah. Elfyn has now won Sweden and he's won Finland. He's won on tarmac as well. He's won on gravel, so he can do it on all surfaces.
And maybe that's what you need, isn't it? You can't be a specialist anymore. No. It's like the Tour de France, isn't it? Not that I know very much about cycling, but you can get stage specialists like Mark Cavendish, who are amazing on.
But they'll never win the whole thing.
But they'll never win the whole thing. Yeah. Good.
So, EVs.
Yes.
Now, there's quite a lot that we need to say about EVs.
Don't switch off.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting discussion.
Certainly from the response that we've had to stories we've read. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? EVs. I think that instinctively people to go. There's a sort of silent groan that sort of goes up. But then if you actually, I think because people know that they are now increasingly part of life and are an inevitability for all of us, I hope people just feel that it's worth listening to because it matters. And hopefully...
It does matter.
Yeah.
And the point that I make, right, is that EVs are happening. They are more or less being forced upon us. For better or worse, I'm not making a judgment there, but they are happening. And because they are happening, we do need to talk about them in quite robust ways.
Yes.
Because they're not perfect. And we need to make sure we're having a good, well-informed dialogue about EVs. And actually, everyone who writes and talks about cars should be, because they are being forced upon us. We're not trying to hold back the tide.
No. And also, we're not... I am certainly not. I know you're not. I'm not taking a position. Sort of anti-EV. We're an anti-EV podcast. We're not a political pressure group. We're just people who love cars and whose job is to review cars and whose job is to review cars on their merits, whatever they may be. And because so many of the cars that come to us these days are EVs, because they are so important and will become increasingly more so for our futures, we can't just pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, it's true. This is also, even now, perhaps even more so now, this is a topic that gets people worked up. Whatever you say as a commentator on cars these days about EVs, you'll irritate someone. I've learnt that, and you just have to go, okay, well, people feel strongly about it. It's great that people feel strongly about it. I'm glad that they do. Sometimes you'll agree with me, sometimes you'll disagree with me, and that's fine.
Because there are no wrong answers.
Yeah.
But we're not saying that our view, the views that we put forward here, they're just what we think. We're not sort of saying this is the way.
Yeah.
But it's also, increasingly, in my case, it does at least come from the point of view of experience. Because you and I are both running EVs at the moment. And whatever I may or may not think about the particular EV that I'm running, and in particular, the business of running it, which obviously involves so much stuff that is external to the car that you're in, particularly how you charge the bloody thing. We are just reporting as we find.
Yeah, we are. We are. So that's right. We're both living with EVs at the moment. I've got an Audi S e-tron GT.
Yes.
You've got a BMW i5 M60 Touring, which is a 5 Series estate with a lot of power.
600 horsepower. 593.
Okay, well, I've got more, so...
Oh, have you?
Nah. And I've said this several times before. I've written about this several times. I'm really enjoying running the Audi. Really enjoying it. I like the power delivery. I like the smoothness. I don't do regular long journeys, so the sort of inconvenience of public charging hasn't been a problem for me. Yes. I can charge at home. So I'm enjoying it. I really am. But... I am not at all blind to the challenges, nor are you, around public charging.
No. So I have changed my view. Okay, I now think that as with all other cars, as with plug-ins and with ICE cars, there are now some really good EVs out there. There's some really rubbish ones. But this i5 I've got, as a thing to go about your daily business in, it is superb. I'd prefer it to a normal 5 Series for all the reasons you talk about, for the quietness, for the refinement, for the power delivery. It's just a really tranquil way to get from one place to another. It lowers my blood pressure right up to the moment that I find myself having to charge it. And so what I would couch, what the terms in which I couch what is to come is that it actually says remarkably little about the car that you're in and everything about the environment in which it finds itself. Which is simply, in my view, and I know you take a slightly different view to this, simply not fit for purpose.
I think that is actually true. It's only because I don't do frequent long journeys that I've been able to get by with this car, and it's been absolutely fine. But I have had charging difficulties with other EVs, and it is a pain. Do you want to talk us through your experience?
Well, okay, so the one that I've written about on the TI website and app, to which you can subscribe now for a 15% discount for life, pod15, coupon code.
Well done.
Thank you very much, at the-intercooler.com. So this is just an example. You and I did a story, also on the TI website and app, sorry for another plug, about 2 Aston Martins, GT8 and GT12. And I turned up in the 5 Series. It spent its day being the camera car. And then I had to go to London to help a daughter move house. And so I knew I would have to go and charge it somewhere. And I did all my research. You don't have to do research if you want to fill up your car with petrol or diesel.
No.
You just find somewhere where you can fill up and you fill up. But I did all my research. I had obviously the ZapMap app. And I knew I needed to go to a grid serve station because they have, so far as I'm aware, the best reputation and the largest number of fast chargers. And I turned up at Cherwell Valley, which is on the M40. And what happened first? Oh, yes, I found a free fast charger. I thought, goody, goody, goody. Then realised why it was free, because it didn't work. So I went and plugged into another one and then realised I hadn't plugged into a fast charger. I plugged into a normal one, which was charging at 36 kilowatts, which would have taken hours, which I didn't have. So I waited for a bit and then another fast charger became available. And I thought, whoopee. And I knew that one would just work because the car had been parked in and had been charged there. So I managed to just, I'm afraid, nip in front of someone who was about to go and use it and jump the queue. No, I didn't jump the queue, but I was, I had to get that spot. So I did. And I plugged it in and I discovered that it was charging at 34 kilowatts, which is even slower than the standard charger. And I didn't understand this. So as I was sort of raging and fuming, and I think you do need to be a certain sort of personality type to take as badly to it as I did. I think there are an awful lot of people who just go, my wife, for instance, would just go, well, you can't control it, relax, just go and sit somewhere, chill, read a book, whatever. I can't do that. So I contacted my mate Ben, who has an i4 and who is a complete EV evangelist. And he was saying, have you done this? Did you precondition your battery? And then he was trying to understand why it was charging so slowly. And he went, how busy is the charging station? And I said, well, it's pretty much full. He said, well, that'll be it. Everybody else is nicking your juice. So this was a charging station, which I think can probably charge at, in theory, like 270 kilowatts. And it was doing 34.
Oh, it's just hopeless.
So, well, it was hopeless. And so the result of that, and I don't want to bang on about it, was that I could only wait for long enough to get enough charge to get me to London, which meant that I had to charge it again on the way home. So I charged at Heston Services on the M4, and the first one said it was in use when it wasn't. And the second one did charge. Finally, this is my 5th charger in less than 24 hours at, I think, like 90 to 120 kilowatts, which is pretty fast. But it's still, the car will charge at 205. And even with your Audi, which I think in theory is capable of charging at like 300, isn't it?
320, yeah.
320. Even you would say you've never seen a charge of 200.
No.
It's never charged at 200, despite the fact the car will charge at 320. So all these, you see all these things, 350 kilowatt charging. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and you see 10 to 80% in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Nowhere does that.
Fantasy.
It is.
It's an absolute fantasy. And there are some people who presumably have a lot of time on their hands who don't mind this. And I said to Ben, because he travels a lot for his work, and he has to go to, he has to go to Croft in the north of England, and he has to go to Pembury in west of Wales, and so he has some big distances to do. And I said, what do you do if you have a meeting you need to be at on time, which is a greater number of miles away than the range of your car? And he says, I leave a lot of extra time.
Yeah.
Because he knows that if he has a nightmare, he's going to miss his meeting. And the thing is there's no knowing.
No.
There's no knowing what experience you're going to have. It's like turning up a petrol station and suddenly discovering it's only going to dispense fuel at the rate of, half a litre a minute. It's just bizarre. And so everybody who has an EV and uses it for those purposes has to leave a huge amount of extra time, or not mind being really, really late, which I cannot abide. But again, I suppose what happens is that most people who have EVs don't use them like that.
Yeah.
But then again, that totally compromises and limits the usage scenario that you can have with a car like that.
And in 10 years, there will only be EVs, or certainly zero-emission cars on sale, so vast majority EVs. So they've got 10 years to sort this all out.
And if they are already struggling to get enough electricity off the grid to service Cherwell Valley at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so not rush hour, what's it going to be like? So you can build, a service station with 300 charging stations, spots, high-speed charger. But if there isn't the electricity going into that service station at the beginning, you might as well, have 10.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same, isn't it?
Doesn't matter.
So, we're talking about this now because every week we see stories in the news about car makers rolling back their plans to introduce EVs or pushing back commitments to become EV only,
Yes.
and giving petrol and diesel models a stay of execution. So Porsche has announced recently it's investing more than £800 million in hybrid and combustion models in 2025 alone.
What's going to be fascinating, just to pick up on that Porsche thing, because I have heard it rumoured, and we all know, don't we, the next generation of Boxsters and Caymans, which are very close. I think they are meant to be this year.
Yeah.
Come on an EV-only platform. Now, what are they going to do about that? There hasn't been an EV sports car that has sold in material numbers that, so far as unless the MG Cyberster has suddenly taken off, and I haven't heard stories to that effect. So, what are they going to do about that? They are already not having a great time with the Taycan.
Sales down 49% last year, despite the facelift.
Yes, and well, we don't want to bang on about it because we have in the past, but that is the Taycan is probably the best EV on sale.
Certainly to drive, yeah.
Yeah, certainly to drive. There is no EV that I would like to spend my time in on a daily basis more than a Taycan. It is an absolutely brilliant example of that art. And if that's struggling, despite the fact that it's a 4-door, almost family-ish type car, what chance for a 2-seat mid-engine sports car? So the question is that investment actually also going into putting some kind of hybrid powertrain into the Boxsters and the Caymans?
It may well be.
If I were Porsche, I would be looking at doing one of two things, or possibly both. One is either just delaying the program until the time is right. It's interesting, isn't it, that Ferrari produced the F80, McLaren produced the W1, and the third member of the Holy Trinity, which was meant to be the Porsche Mission X, was it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Which was an EV, never showed up. So I think you either delay the whole thing, or you find a way of putting plugins in. I just don't see, and I may be completely wrong. I don't see Porsche this year launching all electric Boxsters and Caymans with no petrol-powered alternative.
They're having a tough time, Porsche, at the moment. Their profits are way down, share price is down. They're struggling, and this is Porsche. But it's not just Porsche who's having to change EV plans. Mercedes will launch more ICE cars than EVs between now and the end of 2027. Lotus was going full EV by 2030, now will produce hybrids of some sort. The EVs are selling slowly. Volvo no longer...
Lotus is an absolute train wreck.
Yeah, it is.
So sales volumes for next year down, I think, from 75,000 to 33,000.
Oof.
Oof. Yeah, and for this year, I think they were cut by something like 75%.
Blimey. Volvo no longer all EV by 2030. Seeing growing demand for plug-in hybrids. Bentley no longer all EV by 2030. Audi halting production of some top-end EVs. Aston Martin
Halting production.
Aston Martin delaying the introduction of its first EV. It's a big old mess, isn't it? It's a big old mess. Particularly with those very, very expensive high-end EVs, the kind that we're running at the moment. And it's in part because the residuals are just dreadful.
I mean, the residuals above your car or my car will be eye-watering.
If you're a company car buyer, you don't care about residuals. What you care about is the tax break. And so you're probably going to have an EV because the savings are enormous for you.
And if you buy an Audi e-tron GT or an i5 M60, of course, it won't be you buying it. I imagine that retail sales of cars like that are absolutely minuscule.
Because you just lose so much money. But it does mean that if you can pick up a 2-year-old, former fleet e-tron GT, you're getting a load of money off that car.
A load of money.
Huge amount. And so there is value there now.
There's value there, and the car it probably won't have done a huge number of miles because EVs tend not to. And they don't have many moving parts in them, so they'll probably be very reliable. I mean, I think there's some fantastic bargains to get out there. But the problem is, and the reason that they are the way that they are, is that all these cars have been sold into fleets at massive discounts. And you can't do that without affecting their residual values.
Yeah. There's another issue with EVs at the moment. This came to light last week. The average EV on sale in the UK now exceeds £40,000 sticker price, which is important because any car costing more than £40,000, you have to pay the luxury car tax, and that includes EVs after April this year. And that's an extra £410 on your road tax bill every year for the first 5 years. So now you can buy the average EV in the UK, and if you keep it for 5 years, that luxury car tax will cost you more than £2,000.
So if you buy, I'm just trying to think of an EV that might cost. I'm presuming that's including options and that sort of thing.
It does include options, yeah.
So if you buy a nicely up-spec'd Mini Cooper SE electric, that could cost you £40,000, couldn't it?
Easy. That's a luxury car.
That's a luxury car.
And you have to pay extra tax on it.
And that's before the government has decided to start taxing the electricity that goes into the battery, in the same way that taxes the fuel that goes into your fuel tank.
Yeah. And I mean, it's nuts because the government wants us in EVs. It's actually forcing us into these cars. But at the same time, the average EV, it now comes with an additional £2,000 bill. So do they want us in these things or not?
So, but if you go and buy a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari, it's the same amount of money, presumably.
Yeah.
It's not a sliding. I mean, I don't know enough about this. I probably should. But if you go and spend $250,000 on a car, it's still £410 a year.
I think it probably is. I mean, your road tax bill will be higher anyway. I guess.
Indeed. Yes, of course.
But the luxury car tax is the same levy. So it's crazy, really. I think a big part of the problem with EVs at the moment is the battery technology. It's the charge network and the battery technology. We know lithium-ion batteries are very big. They're very heavy. They're very expensive. Limited range and charging speed. So what we really need for EVs to fulfill their potential is a new battery technology.
We just need someone to perfect solid state, don't we?
So it's coming. Mercedes is now testing a car with a solid state battery. Excuse me. And they're saying range is improved by 25% for the same size and weight of battery. But that's just the first step in solid state. And the company behind this technology says that the next generation solid state battery will have an 80% better range than lithium ion.
I so hope it's right. Forgive me for being cynical. I have heard this story so many times, though. I mean, solid state has been coming and coming and coming. You remember, James Dyson bought a solid state battery company.
Yeah.
And was going to produce an entire new car. And one of Britain's greatest innovators, one of the most resourceful, creative men and resourceful, creative companies this country has ever produced. Couldn't do it. Couldn't find a way. I mean, solid state on paper is the answer to everything.
Yeah.
In reality, it is so difficult to productionize.
So let's wait and see.
Everyone has fallen flat who's tried. Yeah. And everybody has tried.
I believe it's a matter of time, but I don't know what I'm basing that on. But, if this company is right, that's working with Mercedes, and at some point down the line, there are batteries that have 80% better range, that either means the cars become that much more usable, or you can reduce the size of the battery, take a load of cost and weight out of it, and there are real benefits there.
Circular virtue. You know, the moment you have a lighter battery, which is such a heavy component in any car, by far the single heaviest component in any car.
Yeah.
Then obviously your range goes up. You use less electricity, but it also means you can have, smaller, lighter brakes, thinner, lighter tires, less beefy suspension. You can take weight out of absolutely everything, which makes the car lighter, and therefore you can do that. It just becomes a circular virtue. Whereas at the moment we're in a spiral of doom.
Yeah.
Where everything just gets heavier.
And heavier and heavier, bigger and bigger. So final thing then about EVs. I was sent a report by Deloitte about consumer habits around automotive, and clearly EVs is a big part of that. And it found that in the UK, just 8% of people prefer a battery electric vehicle for their next car. Almost half just want an ICE car, 24% want hybrid, 11% want plug-in hybrid. So just 8% prefer a battery electric vehicle for their next car.
And yet, our glorious leaders think that they can force people into spending huge amounts of money they can't afford on cars they don't want. Go figure.
This Deloitte report also found that a third of people in the UK say they can charge at home. And around a third also said they drove more than 60 miles from home more than twice in the last month. Around a third said they drove more than 60 miles from home more than twice. So a lot of people, the vast majority of people, are not doing more than 60 miles in a day 3, 4, 5 times a month.
So people to whom you would think an EV would be very well suited.
So,
and they still don't want them.
That's it. I do think a lot of people overestimate their need for range and for flexibility.
But that's the thing, isn't it? That's the whole thing. It's the thing with the car buying in general. It's the reason that a Range Rover has to be really good off-road. It's a reason that 911s outsell Caymans, because they've got rear seats. There's all this ability people never use, but like to know that they could if they wanted to, or if they needed to. And there's just all that. People just sort of buy on the sort of what-if scenario. Okay, I'm never going to drive. I really can't imagine why I'd ever want to drive this car more than 150 miles. But one day, something might happen, and I'd have to. And then I'd be stuffed. But you wouldn't be stuffed, of course, because you wouldn't be quite so sad about it as I am. And you put up with the charging network, and maybe you get a good experience. Ben, my mate, says most of his charging experiences have been absolutely fine. Yeah. And he wouldn't go back to an ICE car. And he has big experience of an EV, and I think he's a very sensible proponent for them. But
so there are huge challenges around the introduction of EVs at the moment across the board. Do
you think these are we are just living through teething troubles? Do you think that in 20, 30 years' time, we'll look back and we'll go, yeah, that was a difficult time, but for goodness sake, we're trying to change the entire infrastructure, the entire way. After a century of producing cars one way, we decide almost in an instant that cars are just going to be produced a completely different way, which require a completely different infrastructure. And what were you expecting? Yeah. Did you think you'd just snap your fingers and everything would be fine? Of course it was going to be difficult, but actually it only took 20 years to get through this hiccup, and for the rest of time we'll be powered by clean green energy, and everything will be dandy. I completely accept that might well happen.
I think I'm glad you said that, because I think that might well be the case. If give the charge infrastructure 15 years, 20 years to develop, give battery technology 20 years to develop, and we're in a different world, aren't we?
Think about where the car was 20 years after it was invented. Yeah. Car 1886, 20 years later, 1886, it was basically really was a horseless carriage. It was dangerous, it was noisy, it was unreliable. By 1906, you had cars which could cruise at 60 miles an hour. It was. Let's put it this way: cars changed more between 1886 and 1906 than they did between 1906 and now.
Yeah, and so EVs are just going through that same phase, aren't they?
I think they probably are.
Probably. Cars
didn't have steering wheels when they came out.
Yeah, they didn't have air in their tires.
They didn't have air in their tires.
Yeah. So of course, and they are evolving very, very quickly now, but they need to. They really do need to. I as things stand in 2025, my view, I think, is that I would really like an EV, but it needs to be a little one that I use for my local journeys. Something small, something a bit fun, bit nimble,
Yeah.
not crazy expensive, and I would love to knock about in something like that. And I'm actually hoping to be able to do that quite soon. I can't say any more than that, but I really want to explore that a bit more.
See, I want the complete opposite. I want an EV that I can do an enormous distance in because I love the tranquility and the quietness. I just have to be able to recharge it reliably, and I can't.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we have banged on a bit this week, haven't we? But there we go. There's lots to discuss. And EVs, I mean, it's a big topic. You can't just knock that one out.
Sorry, team. More banter next week, promise.
Yeah, we'll get back to it. Okay, well, listen, thank you for sticking with us through all that EV chat. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're just listening to this as a podcast, follow the show, whichever app you're using. It really, really helps us, so please do that. And make sure you come back for another episode next week.
See you then.